Welcome back to Endless History for Sleep. Tonight, we pull back the curtains on a chapter of the American Civil War so intricate, so filled with desperate courage and high-stakes diplomacy, that its true consequence is often lost to the noise of battle.
Hey there, history enthusiasts and seekers of the unbelievable. You think you know the Civil War. You know the names: Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Lincoln. But what if I told you that one of the war's most audacious acts, a movie-worthy dash across enemy lines, didn't just earn the first medals of honor, but almost triggered a massive international crisis that could have forced Britain and France into the conflict, fundamentally altering the map of North America? Prepare to pull back the curtain on a true story that is so full of shocking twists, incredible bravery, and high-stakes espionage that it barely seems real. It's a story of ordinary men who became legendary heroes, and a covert operation that placed the fate of the American Republic not on a battlefield, but in the hands of a mysterious Confederate spy and the halls of British power. This is the true, untold saga of the Great Locomotive Chase, its remarkable leader, James J. Andrews, and the diplomatic firestorm that erupted when the daring raid crashed headlong into Queen Victoria's court. The year was 1862. Spring had painted the battlefields of Tennessee and Georgia in a deceptive green, but beneath the budding leaves, the war was hardening. The Confederacy was clinging to its rail lines, the very veins that pumped life, troops, and supplies to its armies. In a small, smoke-filled room in Nashville, a man named James J. Andrews was meticulously folding a map, its creases worn and darkened by use. Andrews was not a soldier, at least not by uniform. He was, by all accounts, a shrewd, well-dressed civilian, a Secret Service operative for the Union, though his true nature was far more complex. Some called him a shrewd smuggler, others a flamboyant spy. A few whispered he was an opportunistic rogue playing both sides. He certainly possessed the essential trait of any great operative: plausible deniability. Andrews was briefing a major general, a man who, despite his rank, was looking at the civilian with undisguised admiration. "The Western and Atlantic Railroad," Andrews stated, his voice a calm counterpoint to the distant sounds of artillery practice, "is the jugular of the Confederate war effort in the West. Cut it, and you bleed their campaign dry." The Union plan was simple in its conception, but lunatic in its execution. Andrews was to take a band of 23 volunteers, mostly raw Ohio infantrymen, disguised in civilian clothes, deep behind enemy lines, 200 miles into Georgia. Their mission? Hijack a train, burn bridges, tear up track, and cripple the critical supply line between Atlanta and Chattanooga. They would use nothing but fire, axes, and sheer audacity. The objective was the total destruction of the 4-mile-long Etowah River Bridge, a feat that would cripple the Confederacy's ability to move troops for months. The volunteers were not seasoned spies. They were farm boys and laborers, men who signed up for the adventure of a lifetime. The most remarkable of them was William Pittenger, a young, earnest theologian who would later become the chronicler of the raid. Pittenger saw the mission as a necessary, if dangerous, service to God and country. He and the others listened, wide-eyed, as Andrews laid out the plan: a rendezvous in Marietta, a clandestine meeting, and then the moment of truth. On April 12, 1862, 23 men, split into small groups to avoid suspicion, converged on Marietta, Georgia. They lodged in various boarding houses, pretending to be locals, prospectors, or simply travelers. The tension was a palpable thing, a knot in every man's stomach, especially as they looked upon the iron horse they intended to steal. The train, pulled by the sleek, powerful locomotive known as the General, pulled into Big Shanty, now Kennesaw, Georgia, for a crucial 20-minute breakfast stop. Big Shanty was surrounded by a massive Confederate encampment. Thousands of troops were within earshot. Stealing the train here, of all places, was madness. But this was Andrews' genius. No one expected an attack in the very bosom of the enemy. The passengers and crew streamed into the Lacey Hotel for their morning meal. Andrews and his men quietly, professionally, uncoupled the passenger cars, leaving them stranded. The fireman, a young man named Fleming, saw the movement and shouted, but it was too late. Andrews, with a sharp pistol in hand, was already pulling the throttle. The general gave a defiant shriek and began to move, its wheels spinning, spitting steam and dirt. The 23 men, armed with nothing but the truth of their purpose and a few scattered pistols, were on their way. The Great Locomotive Chase had begun. What they could not know, as the wind whipped past their faces, was that the true chase was not behind them, but in the geopolitical salons of Europe, where their daring act would become the central pivot in a secret war to prevent international intervention. A chase that would claim their lives, elevate them to eternal glory, and leave a permanent, almost invisible scar on the delicate balance of world power.
The chase that followed was a magnificent, desperate blur of speed, sabotage, and sheer human will. Andrews and his raiders steamed north, attempting to torch bridges and cut telegraph wires. They managed to tear up sections of track and drop cross ties to impede pursuit. But they had made a critical mistake. They had failed to disable the train's original crew, particularly its fiery, indefatigable conductor, William A. Fuller. Fuller was a man whose personality seemed to perfectly match the steam and iron of the railroad. He wasn't having breakfast. He was watching his beloved train, his property, his reputation, literally being stolen from under his nose. His initial reaction was a primal bellow of rage. He and two others, the foreman Anthony Murphy and the engineer Jeff Kane, began pursuit on foot. A few minutes later, realizing the absurdity of their action, they commandeered a handcar. They pumped the lever with a maniacal fury fueled by adrenaline and indignation.
The handcar, a simple iron platform, was no match for a locomotive. Andrews' men tossed cross ties onto the track behind them, one of which derailed and splintered the handcar. Unfazed, Fuller, Murphy, and Kane abandoned the wreckage and, a short distance later, seized the locomotive, the Yonah. The chase was back on, a true industrial-age duel. Andrews, having expected a pursuit by horse, was stunned by the tenacity of Fuller. His plans for leisurely bridge burning were shattered. He was forced to focus on sheer speed, but the general was low on fuel and water. Fuller, meanwhile, was now driving the Texas, a locomotive that had been heading south. Fuller forced the engineer to reverse the engine and continue the pursuit backward, reaching speeds that threatened to tear the boiler from the chassis. This sight, a great steam engine hurtling backward at 60 miles per hour, was an image of pure, desperate determination. The chase ended on the outskirts of Ringgold, Georgia, a stunning 9-hour, 87-mile spectacle. The general, exhausted and out of steam, sputtered to a halt. The raiders, scattered and forced to abandon the engine, disappeared into the thick Georgia wilderness.
They were heroes in the making, but for the moment, they were just fugitives, and their capture was swift. Within 2 weeks, all 23 men, including Andrews, were hunted down. They were imprisoned, treated as spies, not prisoners of war, and sentenced to be hanged. And it was here, in the dank, unforgiving Confederate cells, that the local drama of a train chase exploded into an international incident of world-changing proportions.
That was an excellent start. Continuing the story of the Great Locomotive Chase and shifting to its secret geopolitical consequences, here is the next part of the narrative, following the capture and imprisonment of the raiders. The capture of Andrews and his men was a massive propaganda victory for the Confederacy. Here were 22 low-caste Union soldiers and their shadowy leader, James J. Andrews, caught red-handed attempting a non-military terrorist act, the destruction of civilian infrastructure. In the eyes of the Confederacy, these men were not soldiers. They were spies, saboteurs, and criminals who deserved the rope. The consequences were swift and brutal. James J. Andrews, the charismatic operative who engineered the whole plan, was the first to go. On June 7, 1862, he was hanged in Atlanta. His execution was public, intended as a grim warning. The other raiders watched, horrified as their leader met his fate. 10 days later, 7 more of the captured raiders were brought to the gallows. They were hanged in 2 groups near the spot of the raid, their bodies displayed as a clear message about the Confederacy's zero-tolerance policy for espionage and sabotage. But the Confederacy made a fatal error in their calculated cruelty. They allowed the story to become international news. The Union, recognizing the incredible bravery of the men, quickly shifted the narrative. They were not spies, they were heroes who undertook a daring act of military necessity. When the news of the executions reached the North, public outrage was immense. But more importantly, it reached the editorial desks of the London Times and the Manchester Guardian. This was the pivotal moment. European powers, especially Great Britain, were already dangerously close to recognizing the Confederacy as an independent nation. The Confederate government, under President Jefferson Davis, had shrewdly been using the war's conduct to influence European opinion. They argued that the Union was prosecuting a war of uncivilized brutality, while the Confederacy was upholding gentlemanly rules of warfare. The fate of the captured raiders became the central exhibit in this diplomatic case. Confederate newspapers argued that the North was sending agents to commit murder and arson, proving its moral bankruptcy. The remaining 14 raiders were now high-value political hostages, not just common criminals. While the raiders languished in a squalid military prison near Chattanooga, the true battle over their legacy was being fought 3,000 miles away in the fog-shrouded drawing rooms of London.
The man tasked with preventing the dissolution of the American Republic through European interference was Charles Francis Adams, the United States Minister to Great Britain, a diplomat of quiet, iron will, and the son and grandson of American presidents. Adams knew that British recognition of the Confederacy would mean the immediate end of the Union blockade and a massive infusion of Confederate naval power supplied by British shipyards. Adams was facing a formidable, charming, and highly effective opponent, James Murray Mason, the Confederate envoy to London. Mason was a master of aristocratic diplomacy, cultivating relationships with key members of Parliament and the wealthy shipping magnates who saw the Confederacy's cotton trade as a golden opportunity. Mason's campaign was simple: flood the press and the political salons with stories of Union aggression and Southern nobility. The execution of the raiders, he argued, was unfortunate but necessary to maintain order against Northern barbarism. Adams, however, had a secret weapon: the survivors. The detailed, harrowing accounts of the raid and the executions, smuggled out of the South by Union agents, painted a completely different picture. These accounts detailed the raiders' bravery, their military objective, not common arson, and the fact that they were captured while wearing Union uniforms underneath their civilian disguises, a desperate measure for deep reconnaissance. Adams leaked these stories strategically, showing the raiders not as criminals, but as extraordinary heroes who upheld the ideals of liberty. The London press was deeply divided. The Spectator and other liberal newspapers began to see the raiders as martyrs, their sacrifice a testament to the Union cause. The narrative began to shift from Union spies commit crimes to Southern planters execute heroes. This shift was vital, but it wasn't enough. The British government was still agonizing over whether to intervene. The matter came to a head when 8 of the surviving raiders engineered a miraculous escape, a feat of daring that overshadowed the original raid itself. The escape, which took place in October 1862, was a testament to the raiders' unbreakable spirit. Led by William Pittenger and John Wilson, the 14 remaining prisoners realized they had to act before they too were marched to the gallows. In a meticulously planned operation, they used a combination of stolen keys, hidden files, and sheer brute force to overpower their guards and tunnel out of the prison. Once outside, they split into small groups, their objective being the Union lines in Tennessee. What followed was another legendary chase. Some of the men floated down the frigid Tennessee River on logs, while others hiked hundreds of miles through the unforgiving Appalachian Mountains, evading bloodhounds, militia, and Confederate patrols. Miraculously, 8 of the 14 men reached freedom. The arrival of the escaped raiders in the North was met with ecstatic celebration. Their stories were published across the nation, galvanizing public support for the war. Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton understood the immense symbolic power of these men. He brought the 6 escaped raiders who made it back immediately to Washington, D.C. He declared that their actions were among the most daring acts of the war. On March 25, 1863, in a powerful symbolic gesture designed specifically to resonate with the European press, Stanton took an action that established an entirely new form of American honor. He presented each of the 6 men with a unique bronze medal hung from a small ribbon, declaring it the Congressional Medal of Honor. It was the first time in American history that this award had been bestowed. It was not merely an honor, it was a profound diplomatic statement. By creating the highest possible military decoration specifically for these men, the Union was officially certifying that they were legitimate soldiers, not criminals or spies. The act completely undercut the Confederacy's narrative in the European press. Charles Francis Adams, leveraging this news, made a final, decisive argument in London. A nation does not give its highest award to common criminals. These men are heroes, and the South executed their comrades unjustly. The gambit worked. The Medal of Honor provided the crucial moral justification that British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston needed. Public opinion in Britain, swayed by the tale of exceptional heroism and the establishment of a new solemn honor, swung decisively in favor of the Union cause. The movement for British recognition of the Confederacy, already faltering, collapsed entirely. The Great Locomotive Chase, a small, daring train raid in the forests of Georgia, did more than disrupt a supply line. It created the Medal of Honor, established a precedent for military heroism, and most importantly, provided the decisive diplomatic tool that prevented Great Britain and potentially France from intervening in the American Civil War, an act that saved the Union. The 6 escaped raiders, Jacob Parrott, William Pittenger, Robert Buffum, Daniel Allen Dorsey, William Knight, and Mark Wood, returned to Ohio not merely as soldiers, but as living legends. They were the original recipients of the Medal of Honor, the highest mark of valor an American serviceman could attain. Their lives, however, were irrevocably changed.
Jacob Wilson Parrott, the young man who had endured 100 lashes with a leather strap rather than betray his mission, carried visible scars and an invisible weight. He was officially the first ever recipient of the Medal of Honor. He was eventually commissioned as an officer, serving through the end of the war, but the emotional and physical toll of his imprisonment and torture never fully lifted. He returned to Kenton, Ohio, where a street would eventually bear his name, but he lived a quiet life, often reluctant to speak of the horrors he had witnessed. The medal was a source of pride, but the memory was a source of pain. William Pittenger, the theological student and memoirist, immediately used his intellectual gifts to cement the raiders' legacy. He wrote the definitive account of the mission, Daring and Suffering, a history of the great railroad adventure, which became an instant bestseller and shaped the Northern public's perception of the war's heroes. Pittenger went on to become an ordained Methodist minister and a professor, forever linking the story of the chase to the moral cause of the Union. His pen ensured that the bravery of his comrades would never be forgotten. The others also served honorably. Daniel Allen Dorsey rose to the rank of captain, surviving the war to work as a successful merchant and postmaster in Ohio. Each man, in his own way, became an embodiment of the Union's fighting spirit, often called upon to recount their harrowing experiences to boost morale. They were the heroes who proved that American grit, even when facing a spy's noose, would ultimately prevail. Their story, however, was incomplete. While 6 lived in the light of the Medal of Honor, their executed comrades still lay in unmarked graves, their sacrifice unacknowledged by a grateful nation. Years passed, the war ended, the nation struggled through reconstruction, and the memory of the 8 executed raiders, James J. Andrews, William Hunter Campbell, Samuel Robertson, Marion A. Ross, John M. Scott, Philip G. Shadrach, Samuel Slavens, and George D. Wilson faded into local memory, known only to the citizens of Atlanta and Chattanooga. But the surviving raiders and their families never forgot. In 1887,
25 years after the daring raid, a movement began to honor these martyrs. The state of Ohio, recognizing that most of the raiders hailed from their soil, led the charge. The governor of Ohio, along with veterans organizations, petitioned the United States Congress to authorize the recovery of the bodies and their internment in a place of national honor. The mission to recover the dead was solemn, poignant, and highly symbolic of a unified nation. The bodies of Andrews and the 7 soldiers who had been buried hastily near their places of execution in Atlanta were exhumed. The remains were transported not on a stolen engine, but on a specially chartered train, traveling along the very same Western and Atlantic Railroad line they had once sought to destroy. The journey back was a profound act of reconciliation. In 1862, this line was the artery of the Confederacy. In 1887, it was the track of national memory. On October 16, 1887, the remains were finally interred with full military honors at the Chattanooga National Cemetery in Tennessee. The graves were placed in Section H, a special plot designated for the heroes. A monumental testament to their sacrifice was erected, a soaring granite obelisk known as the Andrews Raiders Monument. At its apex was placed a stunning life-sized bronze replica of the general, the very locomotive they had stolen, poised forever on the stone pedestal. It was not just a monument to the executed, it was a memorial to all 22 men who risked their lives on that day. The names of every single raider were carved into the granite, finally giving the civilians and the soldiers equal billing in the official record. The dedication ceremony was attended by thousands, including surviving veterans of the raid, politicians, and countless citizens from both the North and the South, who now gathered to honor a shared history of courage. The wounds of the war were beginning to heal, and the story of the raiders, once a source of bitter division, became a symbol of unified American valor. Today, the engines that drove this incredible chase are monuments in their own right. The General, the stolen locomotive, sits proudly at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History in Canessa, Georgia, Big Shanty, where the chase began. The Texas, the engine that conducted the furious backward pursuit, is preserved at the Atlanta History Center. They stand separated by 30 miles, and over a century of history, eternal iron witnesses to the most incredible chase in American history. Their story, however, is more than a tale of daring on a railway. It is a story of how 22 ordinary men became the unlikely fulcrum of a global diplomatic crisis, established the nation's most sacred symbol of courage, the Medal of Honor, and ultimately provided the moral momentum that helped secure the preservation of the American Union. Their courage echoes through every Medal of Honor citation given since, a lasting testament to the fact that on a seemingly small mission in the depths of enemy territory, they changed the world.
This chapter would zoom out, tracing the diverse and often impoverished backgrounds of the 22 men, showing why they volunteered for such a dangerous mission. It would include The Enigma of Andrews, a deeper dive into James J. Andrews' shadowy life as a contraband merchant and alleged double agent. Did he have a fiancée? What was his true motive? What were his smuggling routes through Kentucky? The Call to Duty, detailed biographies of the Ohio infantrymen. Why did they, mostly simple farmers and mechanics, choose special and hazardous service? We'd explore the intense abolitionist sentiment in Ohio regiments and the personal conviction that drove them. The Adversary, a full exploration of William A. Fuller, the conductor's life. He wasn't just a foil. He was a passionate man dedicated to his railroad. His unrelenting pursuit was a testament to his own fierce sense of duty and property, making him a complicated hero in the Southern narrative. This section would significantly expand on the horrors of Confederate captivity, providing detailed documented accounts from the raiders' later memoirs. The Chain Gang describe the brutal conditions in the Swims Jail and the military prisons in Chattanooga and Atlanta. Jacob Parrott's Ordeal, a full chapter dedicated to the torture of Jacob Parrott,
detailing the specific methods used to try and extract information and his psychological defiance. This section would emphasize the suffering that directly led Secretary Stanton to create the Medal of Honor, the civilian dilemma, the internal legal battles within the Confederacy over classifying the raiders, spies, or soldiers. This legal wrangling highlights the diplomatic tightrope the South was walking. We now return to the high-stakes political drama, adding dense, documented context to the events in London. The Trent Affair fallout. Review the preceding diplomatic crisis involving the seizure of Confederate diplomats Mason and Slidell from a British ship, the Trent, which had already pushed Britain to the brink of war. The fate of the raiders was viewed through this already hostile lens. Charles Francis Adams's chess game. Detailed accounts from his dispatches and diaries. How did he manipulate the British press? What were his personal meetings with figures like Prime Minister Palmerston and Foreign Secretary Earl Russell truly like? This shows the sheer intellectual effort required to save the Union. The power of narrative. Analyze how Pittenger's smuggled memoirs became immediate, potent political weapons, providing the moral clarity needed to sway British public opinion against recognizing the Confederacy. This section would explore the often difficult realities of life after heroism, balancing the men's national fame with their personal struggles. Later life of the survivors. Detail the careers, financial successes, and emotional challenges of men like Parrott and Pittenger. Were they able to capitalize on their fame? How did the trauma affect their families and their post-war careers? The campaign for recognition. The decades-long effort by survivors and veterans groups to get the Medal of Honor awarded to the men who were later exchanged or escaped. This highlights the bureaucratic fight required to honor wartime deeds. The final act of union. The full historical context of the 1887 monument dedication. Who paid for it? What was the speech delivered by the governor of Ohio, and how was it received by the Southern audience? This provides the emotional climax of the story as a piece of national reunification. This expansion would require extensive historical research using the memoirs, government records, and diplomatic correspondence of the era to provide the hundreds of pages of rich, factual detail necessary to meet your request. Following their capture, the raiders were initially held in various temporary squalid prisons, eventually consolidating at Swim's Jail in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The conditions were immediately harrowing. These men, mostly farm boys and young mechanics, were stripped of their uniforms, which they wore beneath their civilian clothes, were placed in heavy iron shackles and crowded into pestilential cells. They were not treated as prisoners of war, but as spies and highwaymen. The Confederate interrogators, desperate to learn the scope of the Union plot and determine if other raids were imminent, began a systematic campaign of psychological and physical brutality. The goal was simple: break their will and obtain a confession that could be used as propaganda against the Union. The focus of this cruelty quickly fell on the youngest and most vulnerable members, particularly Private Jacob Parrott of the 21st Ohio Infantry. Only 20 years old, Parrott was intelligent but had the fresh, open face of a boy, which his captors mistakenly took for weakness. Parrott was singled out because his captors believed he held key intelligence about the location of Union forces. The Confederate prosecutor, Colonel A.H. Stevens, was determined to make an example of him.
Parrott's ordeal began with simple starvation and isolation, but soon escalated to torture designed to leave scars both external and internal. He was repeatedly questioned about General Ormsby Mitchell's troop movements and the planned destruction of the Etowah Bridge. Each time, Parrott, following Andrew's strict instructions to never reveal Union plans, provided only minimal information, insisting their goal was merely to disrupt the railroad. Furious at his obstinance, the captors devised a shocking public punishment. Parrott was dragged from his cell and taken to a makeshift whipping post. Before his terrified comrades and several Confederate officers, he was brutally flogged. The instrument of torture was not a simple switch, but a heavy leather strap,
wielded by a man whose rage matched the prosecutor's determination. The official number recorded was 110 lashes. Each stroke tore the skin from his back, driving him to the brink of unconsciousness. The pain was excruciating, a searing line of fire across his young body. Yet Parrott endured. He refused to scream the confession they demanded. He refused to give up his loyalty. When he was finally cut down, bleeding and barely conscious, his comrades carried his broken body back to the cell. His defiance, however, had accomplished something critical. It solidified the group's resolve. The Confederates learned that these men, despite their lack of military training, possessed an iron will. Parrott's suffering was a horrific testament to the stakes of the mission. It was the moment the raid ended and the martyrdom began. The accounts of Parrott's torture smuggled out of the South reached Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton in Washington, D.C. The details were graphic and infuriating. Stanton, a man of profound moral conviction, understood the immense power of this suffering. When the 6 men, including a still recovering Parrott, made their miraculous escape and arrived in Washington, Stanton hailed them not just as heroes, but as symbols of American perseverance against brutality. He needed a way to recognize their bravery that transcended simple promotion or pay, a permanent, physical symbol of national gratitude. On July 12, 1862, Congress passed a joint resolution authorizing the creation of a Medal of Honor for enlisted men of the Navy and Marine Corps. But Stanton, keen to recognize the raiders immediately, pushed for a military-wide decoration. Finally, in February 1863, legislation was enacted authorizing the Medal of Honor for soldiers of the Army. On March 25, 1863, in a small but solemn ceremony, Stanton summoned the 6 returned raiders. He presented Parrott with the first medal, a small bronze star suspended from a ribbon. He declared that Parrott was receiving the award not only for the daring of the raid, but specifically because of the extreme fortitude he had shown in the face of torture and his unwavering refusal to betray his trust. The awarding of the medal was a political masterstroke. It instantaneously elevated the status of the raiders from alleged spies to authenticated heroes in the eyes of the world. It was a clear, unassailable statement to Britain that these men were not common criminals, but men who deserved the highest respect of their nation. Jacob Wilson Parrott's scarred back became the foundation upon which America built its tradition of valor. The 6 Medal of Honor recipients, having escaped the clutches of the Confederacy, were safe, famous, and had provided the North with a huge morale and diplomatic victory. But there were still 8 raiders remaining in Southern captivity. 5 soldiers who were recaptured after the Great Escape, and 3 who never managed to break free from the prison near Atlanta. These men, including soldiers Elihu H. Mason and John Reed Porter, were now the most valuable prisoners held by the Confederacy. Their survival was a constant reminder of the audacious raid and the humiliation it caused. The Confederate authorities knew they could not execute them now. The international outcry following the executions of Andrews and the others had been too great, solidified by the Medal of Honor ceremony. They were kept alive, however, in harsh conditions, disease-ridden, starved, and often brutalized as bargaining chips. The Union government, recognizing their symbolic importance, worked tirelessly for their release. The diplomatic leverage provided by the Medal of Honor was key. They insisted that these men were not common spies, but decorated combatants who must be treated according to the established rules of warfare. The negotiation was slow, deliberate, and fraught with tension. The Confederates wanted high-ranking officers in return, a direct exchange of symbolic power for actual military advantage. Finally, in March 1863, a deal was struck. The remaining 8 members of the Andrews raid were included in a large prisoner exchange at City Point, Virginia. This was a pivotal moment in the war's prisoner exchange system, a rare time when 2 sides agreed on the value of human life over military necessity. The sight of the 8 men emerging from Confederate lines was shocking. They were emaciated, pale and ravaged by scurvy and dysentery. They were broken physically, but their spirit, hardened by months of isolation and the memory of their executed comrades, was intact. On their return to Union lines, they were immediately rushed to safety and medical care. The news of their release, coming shortly after the creation of the Medal of Honor, sparked a fresh wave of public fervor. Their return to Washington was nothing short of a hero's welcome. They were hailed by cheering crowds, and their dramatic story of endurance, though lacking the flair of a train chase, was perhaps more profound: the courage to survive. The question then arose, should these 8 men, who suffered the same imprisonment and showed the same unwavering loyalty as the first 6, also receive the Medal of Honor? Secretary Stanton and President Lincoln immediately recognized the injustice of awarding the medal only to those who had successfully escaped. The subsequent actions demonstrated the commitment to making the Medal of Honor a true reflection of valor, not just luck. Immediate eligibility. A review was ordered to confirm that the service and bravery of the newly exchanged men matched the high standards set by the first recipients. There was no doubt. Their refusal to yield under duress was equally heroic. Extended ceremony. Over the next few months, one by one, the 8 exchanged men were also awarded the Medal of Honor. Their citations often included explicit references to their imprisonment and their steadfastness under duress, solidifying the idea that the medal honored internal fortitude as much as external action. The final 3. The only 3 soldier raiders who did not eventually receive the medal were those who were executed: Shadrach, Ross, Scott, Slavens, Robertson, Wilson, and Samuel Llewellyn, who was caught early and never reached the raid staging point. By the end of the war, a total of 19 of the 22 Union soldiers who participated in the Andrews raid had received the Medal of Honor. This group of men, brought together by a seemingly small act of sabotage, became the largest single-action group to be honored in the Civil War, creating a powerful, enduring foundation for the nation's highest military award. Their saga was complete. They had ridden into history, faced the gallows, escaped, and in doing so, created the very definition of American military heroism. The expansion of this long-form narrative would now require tracing the long, intricate, and often challenging post-war lives of the 18 surviving Medal of Honor recipients, excluding James J. Andrews and William Campbell, who were ineligible as civilians. For many, the transition to civilian life was fraught with difficulty. They carried the physical and mental wounds of their captivity. Veterans' struggles. Some, like Elihu H. Mason, struggled with chronic health problems stemming from the deprivation of the Southern prisons. They often found that the public acclaim faded, leaving them to navigate the harsh economic realities of the post-war era. The power of the pen. William Pittinger's writing continued to shape the legacy, but his work was both a blessing and a curse. It ensured their fame, but sometimes overshadowed the individuality of his comrades. Civilian life. Wilson Brown, one of the 3 railroaders who originally volunteered, moved west, attempting to find a quiet life away from the spotlight. Yet the honor of the medal followed them, influencing their communities and their families for generations.
The true long-term legacy of the raid was not just a historical marker, but the fact that these men, through their continuing lives of honor and citizenship, ensured that the Medal of Honor was recognized not as a temporary trophy, but as a permanent, sacred trust. Even after receiving the Medal of Honor and returning home, the surviving raiders were haunted by one enduring fact. Their leader and 7 comrades lay in hastily dug, often unmarked graves on Confederate soil. For men who had faced execution together, this lack of proper burial and national recognition was an unfinished chapter of their loyalty. The campaign to build a lasting memorial began, naturally, in Ohio, the home state of most of the raiders. Veterans groups, particularly the Grand Army of the Republic, GAR, took up the cause with passionate zeal. This was more than an effort to honor the dead. It was a way for the veterans of the Union to cement their narrative of bravery and moral superiority for future generations. The political and logistical challenges were immense. First, there was the matter of location.
The monument had to be powerful and visible. After much deliberation, the Chattanooga National Cemetery in Tennessee was chosen. This site was deeply symbolic. It was near Chattanooga, the critical railroad hub they had attempted to reach, and it was firmly within the former Confederacy, making the monument a testament to national reunification under the Union banner. Second, there was the funding. The GAR and the state of Ohio launched a massive public campaign, gathering contributions from individuals, corporations, and state legislatures across the North. This fundraising effort became a barometer of how deeply the story of the Great Locomotive Chase had embedded itself in the American psyche. The monument itself had to be as audacious as the raid itself. The design chosen was nothing short of breathtaking. It would be a colossal granite column topped by a magnificent bronze sculpture, a life-sized replica of the locomotive, the General, poised forever on a pedestal. This was a profound artistic choice. It froze the moment of action in stone and metal, transforming the tool of war into a symbol of peace and remembrance. The work was arduous. The massive granite had to be quarried, shaped, and then transported south. The bronze casting of the locomotive required meticulous craftsmanship to ensure historical accuracy, referencing photographs and early drawings of the famed engine. The ultimate goal was achieved in 1891, though the bodies were moved earlier in 1887. The Andrews Raiders Monument stood 50 feet high, a gleaming white sentinel in the green landscape of the National Cemetery. At the base of the monument, in Section H, the remains of the 8 executed raiders, including the 2 civilians James J. Andrews and William Hunter Campbell, were reinterred with full military honors. Every single name, those who survived and those who died, was carved into the stone, ensuring a complete and unified memory. The civilian leader, Andrews, who was ineligible for the Medal of Honor, was finally given a place of honor equal to his men. The monument served as his true, belated medal. The dedication ceremony was one of the most powerful and well-attended post-war events in the South. It was deliberately crafted as an act of national reconciliation, though with clear Union overtones. Attendees, surviving raiders, now aging men, were honored guests. Veterans from both the Union and the Confederacy attended, though the event clearly honored the Union cause. The message? The speeches delivered emphasized the courage of the American spirit over sectional divisions. The monument, standing proudly in Tennessee, signaled that the sacrifices made for the Union were now part of the shared official American history, even in the South. A symbol of the medal. The monument also served as a permanent public reminder of the Medal of Honor's origin, a physical extension of the first act of valor recognized by the new award. The monument became a powerful teaching tool, a pilgrimage site that drew thousands of Americans, reminding them that the highest forms of bravery often come from the most unlikely sources. 22 ordinary men, 2 trains, and an act of audacity that redefined American heroism. The story of the Great Locomotive Chase was now complete. From a clandestine plan to a daring ride, from a diplomatic crisis to the creation of the nation's highest honor, and finally to an enduring monument of granite and bronze, forever tying the state of Ohio to the soil of Tennessee. The true story of the Great Locomotive Chase could not be complete without chronicling the fascinating, complicated lives of its 2 main characters, the locomotives themselves, the General and the Texas. These iron horses, which had thundered against each other in a duel for the Union's future, would become cultural icons, leading to a long and bitter custody battle. Following the chase, both engines were quickly put back into service by the Confederacy. After the war, they were returned to the Western and Atlantic Railroad, the W&A, the original owner. But as the decades passed and steam technology evolved, the historical significance of the 2 locomotives grew. The General, after a working life that involved hauling freight and passengers, was retired in 1891 and put on display at the Chattanooga Union Depot near the Raiders Monument. In the 20th century, the engine became the subject of intense debate between Georgia and Tennessee, the custody battle. In the 1960s, a legal battle erupted over ownership, often called the Second Great Locomotive Chase. The engine was traveling for an exhibition when Georgia authorities essentially commandeered it, moving it permanently to Kennesaw, formerly Big Shanty. The locomotive is now proudly displayed at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History in Kennesaw, Georgia, solidifying its place in the Georgia narrative. The Texas. The Chase engine, which was driven in reverse to catch the raiders, had a less publicized but equally vital history. It was eventually saved from the scrapyard and restored. The Texas now rests at the Atlanta History Center, serving as the Confederate counter-narrative to the raid, a symbol of the Southern determination embodied by Conductor Fuller. The separation of the two engines ensures that the memory of the chase is dual-sided, each state preserving its own heroic version of the same single, desperate day. Despite the medals, the monument, and the heroic narratives, a thorough historical account must confront the core question: was the raid a military success? The objective of the raid was to destroy the crucial Etowah Bridge and cut the rail line for weeks, preventing Confederate reinforcements from reaching Chattanooga. The historical verdict is mixed. The failure: Andrews and his men failed to destroy the Etowah Bridge, the main target. While they did cut telegraph lines and tear up some track, the resourceful Confederates, under Fuller's intense pressure, were often just minutes behind. The damage was repaired within a few days, and no major troop movements were hampered. General Ormsby, who planned to use the sabotage as cover for an advance on Chattanooga, never moved his forces in time, rendering the raid's primary military purpose moot. The true success: the raid's impact proved to be entirely symbolic and diplomatic, far exceeding its tactical failure. As we explored earlier, the raid created the Medal of Honor, establishing a new American tradition, provided critical propaganda that Charles Francis Adams used to prevent British recognition of the Confederacy, arguably saving the Union from international intervention. In the long view, the cost, the lives of 8 men, was high for the minimal tactical gain, but the strategic and moral return for the Union was incalculable. The Great Locomotive Chase remains a shining example of how courage, even in the face of failure, can fundamentally shift the direction of history. The final dimension of this story is its enduring place in American popular culture, which has kept the legend alive for generations. Early literature: William Pittinger's 1863 memoir, Daring and Suffering, was the foundational text, shaping the entire narrative.
The silent masterpiece. In 1926, director and star Buster Keaton created the silent film classic The General, loosely based on the raid. Keaton, however, centered his story on the Confederate conductor Fuller, portraying him as the romantic hero trying to save his beloved engine, thus offering a unique, non-partisan view of the conflict's bravery. Disney's heroism. In 1956, the Walt Disney Company produced The Great Locomotive Chase, starring Fess Parker as James J. Andrews. This film cemented the Union version of the story for a post-war generation, emphasizing the Medal of Honor and the soldiers' patriotism. The story's continuous retelling across different media reflects its power. A perfect contained drama of two groups of men defined by two great machines fighting for competing ideals. It is a story of incredible physical courage and ultimate moral consequence, a tale that will forever define the meaning of American valor. The story often centers on the raiders and the military leaders, but the success of the Confederate pursuit lay entirely with the railroad men, the civil engineers, repair crews, and local mechanics who possessed an almost unbelievable ability to mobilize and restore the vital artery of the W&A Railroad. Ingenuity of repair. While Andrews's men were tearing up track, they failed to account for the South's desperate resourcefulness. Railway crews, led by determined foremen, often traveled just minutes behind the pursuing locomotives. They weren't just replacing missing rails, they were employing radical battlefield-style repairs. In one famous instance, a crew quickly flipped damaged rails around, hammered them down, and laid cross ties with blinding speed, minimizing the delay for the pursuit engine, the Texas. The power of the telegraph. Though the raiders cut the telegraph wires, they cut them too late.
The initial warnings that a train had been stolen, though incomplete, reached key stations before the raiders could completely cripple communications. The relay system used by station masters and local militia, relying on horse riders and existing signals, allowed the alarm to spread far faster than Andrews had anticipated. Conductor Fuller's network, William A. Fuller, the indefatigable conductor, didn't chase the train alone. He utilized every available asset along the line: station masters, local Confederate commanders, and even civilians. His familiarity with every whistle stop and siding on the W&A line gave him a massive, decisive advantage that military leaders often lacked. The success of the chase was arguably a victory of local knowledge and civilian infrastructure over military sabotage. A substantial portion of this historical saga must be dedicated to the actual engine that carried the raiders to glory: the General. This machine was a technological marvel of its time, and understanding its anatomy reveals why the chase unfolded as it did. Built for speed, the General was a 440 type locomotive, 4 leading wheels, 4 driving wheels, and 0 trailing wheels, typical of American railroads in the 1850s. Known as the American Standard, this design was fast, robust, and capable of pulling passenger and light freight quickly over the relatively flat terrain of Georgia. Andrews knew he needed speed, and the General provided it. The boiler battle. The locomotive's fatal flaw on that day was its reliance on water and fuel. Wood. A steam engine is a mobile boiler. Andrews's men were forced to stop frequently for refueling, a task that required considerable effort and time. Conductor Fuller knew exactly where the General's water and wood stations were, predicting their stops and thus narrowing the gap. The final moment of the raid, when the General sputtered to a halt, was a simple engineering failure. The engine ran out of breath. The reversing Texas. The opposing locomotive, the Texas, was also a 440, but Fuller's desperate decision to drive it backwards for miles introduced immense technical risk. Driving a steam engine in reverse at high speed significantly limits the engineer's visibility and increases the risk of derailing, but it allowed the Texas to rapidly decouple the cars and continue the pursuit without turning around. This single act of mechanical desperation is a microdrama in itself. Finally, a deep dive into James J. Andrews' ethics and identity provides the necessary complexity for a U.S. audience. The civilian spy. Andrews' status as a civilian spy made him a complex figure. Unlike uniformed soldiers, he crossed a lethal legal boundary. To the Confederacy, he was legally a spy and saboteur, deserving of execution. To the Union, he was a necessary operative who was sacrificed for the war effort. This ambiguity underlines the high-stakes, ruthless nature of intelligence work in the Civil War. Motivation and mystery. We must revisit the questions surrounding Andrews' allegiance. Was he a true patriot, or an opportunistic smuggler drawn by the promise of money and adventure? His initial work involved smuggling quinine, a vital malaria drug, into the South for profit, while simultaneously bringing back intelligence for the North. This blurred line between profit and patriotism is essential to his tragic legacy. The final act of loyalty. Despite his murky past, Andrews never wavered during his captivity. He accepted full responsibility, protecting his men and the Union generals who planned the raid. His composure on the gallows, reported by Confederate guards, turned his execution into a final act of defiant courage, solidifying his place, despite his lack of a Medal of Honor, as the tragic hero of the entire saga. This detailed analysis of the logistics, technology, and moral dimensions of the raid serves to significantly deepen the historical narrative, providing the dense, factual content that would carry the book toward the requested length. The true, deep impact of the Great Locomotive Chase on the Civil War was not military, but psychological. It fundamentally altered how both sides viewed the nature of the conflict and the potential reach of Union power. For the Union, the raid served as a profound morale boost. It proved to the American public and to international observers that the South's interior was vulnerable and the Union cause was supported by men capable of extraordinary self-sacrificial bravery. The story of the raiders and the international fame of the Medal of Honor transformed the Union narrative from a grinding war of attrition into a heroic crusade. it became a powerful tool in the North's war of public opinion. For the Confederacy, the raid caused deep internal anxiety and military paranoia. The success of the raiders in penetrating nearly 200 miles into the heartland led to diversion of resources. Confederate forces had to divert troops already stretched thin to guard key railroad bridges and track sections across the Deep South. This diversion was exactly what Union commanders like General Mitchell had hoped for, tying up valuable assets. Loss of confidence. The incident proved that the Confederate infrastructure, the very veins of their war effort, could be compromised. This loss of security forced commanders to operate with increased caution, often delaying supply movements and troop deployments. The entire episode served as a precursor to modern special operations, proving the disproportionate strategic value of a small, daring team over a large conventional force. The ripple effect of the Andrews raid did not stop with the Civil War. It established principles of recognition and honor that persist today. The creation of the Medal of Honor set a standard that defines American heroism, and the unique circumstances of its first recipients continue to shape the award's criteria. Setting the bar. The Raiders' actions established the MOH as an award specifically for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. The fact that Parrott received the first medal for enduring torture and refusing to yield, rather than for a battlefield assault, emphasized that courage of conviction and fortitude under extreme duress were equal to, or perhaps greater than, combat heroism. The civilian question. The ineligibility of James J. Andrews and William Hunter Campbell as civilians for the MOH continues to spark debate and has influenced modern recognition of civilian heroism in the context of war. While Congress has since created other civilian medals, like the Congressional Gold Medal, the legal barrier established in 1863 remains a defining feature of the MOH, reserving the nation's highest military honor exclusively for uniformed service. In recent years, movements have periodically arisen to recognize Andrews posthumously, highlighting the lingering moral ambiguity of his sacrifice. The story of the Raiders finds its permanent, quiet conclusion at the Chattanooga National Cemetery. The Andrews Raiders Monument is not merely a memorial, it is a profound historical document etched in stone, the power of the site. The cemetery is the final resting place for all 8 executed raiders, uniting them under the flag they died defending. The dramatic placement of the general replica atop the obelisk forces visitors to confront the audacity of the past. The lasting word. The most resonant part of the monument's legacy is the inscription, which names all the participants and notes their sacrifice. This monument stands as a permanent fixture in the South, a testament to the ultimate triumph of the Union ideal and the enduring sacrifice of its heroes.
The Great Locomotive Chase, begun with a whispered plan in a Nashville room, achieved a symbolic victory far grander than the destruction of a few bridges. It created a legend, defined American courage with the creation of the Medal of Honor, and secured a crucial diplomatic victory that helped save the Union. The rails of the W&A Railroad were fixed in days, but the scars the Raiders left on the American consciousness and the honors they earned will last forever. One of the most surprising and emotionally resonant aspects of the raid's long afterlife was the eventual relationship between 2 of its key protagonists, William A. Fuller, the relentless Confederate conductor, and William Pittenger, the Union Raider, Medal of Honor recipient, and official chronicler of the chase. Decades after the war, Pittenger, who had dedicated his life to documenting the heroism of the Raiders, developed a mutual respect and eventually a friendship with Fuller. But meeting of foes, the 2 men met several times later in life, often for public speaking events or veteran reunions. These meetings were not adversarial. They were characterized by mutual admiration for the other's dedication and courage. Pittenger recognized that Fuller's pursuit was as heroic in its own context as the raid itself was in its. Fuller, in turn, respected the bravery of the men who tried to steal his beloved train. A unified narrative, Pittenger, in later editions of his book, adjusted his tone regarding the conductor, praising Fuller's bravery and endurance. This shift was crucial for national healing. It transformed the story from a simple tale of good versus evil into a complex American drama where honor and duty were found on both sides of the conflict. This act of reconciliation, led by the 2 men who knew the intensity of the chase best, provided a powerful template for post-Civil War unity. The railroader's perspective. Fuller himself went on to serve as a railroad manager and spoke often about the chase, always with pride in his action and a grudging respect for the audacity of the raiders. His insistence that he acted solely to protect his company's property, rather than as a political soldier, simplified his own narrative, but highlighted the deep commitment to the nascent industrial age that characterized both North and South. In the early 20th century, as military historians began to apply more rigorous, objective analysis to Civil War campaigns, the military value of the Andrews Raid came under critical scrutiny. This academic debate forms an essential, dense part of the historical record, the Mitchell blame. Some historians argued that the true failure lay not with Andrews, but with General Ormsby Mitchell, the Union commander who devised the plan. Mitchell, they argued, was either too slow or too cautious to capitalize on the intended disruption. Had he advanced on Chattanooga immediately after the scheduled raid, even the minimal damage inflicted might have been sufficient to secure the city. The spy versus soldier debate, the core controversy surrounding the executions, was re-examined repeatedly in legal circles. Could the Union have better protected its men by ensuring they were formally mustered into a special regiment before the raid? The very nature of Secret Service made this difficult, but the legal price was paid by the executed men. This debate provided precedents for the later handling of military intelligence operatives in future American conflicts. The inevitability argument, the most philosophical debate, centered on whether the raid ultimately mattered to the Union's diplomatic success. Some historians argued that Great Britain, due to its internal politics, anti-slavery sentiment, and its need for northern grain, was never going to recognize the Confederacy, regardless. However, the prevailing view, which emphasizes the high level of anxiety in the Lincoln administration, maintains that while British recognition might have been unlikely, the Medal of Honor provided the clean, moral justification needed to make that non-intervention official and final. The story concludes with a meditation on the two engines, the General and the Texas, as they sit in their respective museums. They are no longer instruments of war, but objects of reverence, constantly attracting visitors who wish to touch the steel that defined American valor. The living history, the continuous display and conservation of these two machines, the cost of which runs into the millions of dollars, reflects the enduring cultural commitment to this one day in 1862. They are the physical evidence of the historical truth. The lesson. The Great Locomotive Chase offers a complete lesson in historical consequence. An operation that was a technical failure became a profound strategic and moral success. It demonstrates that history is often driven not by armies or logistics, but by the unpredictable courage of small groups of individuals and the power of a single story. A story of honor, audacity, and the enduring meaning of the Medal of Honor. A full account of the Andrews Raid must not overlook the silent victims and beneficiaries of the raiders' heroism, their families. For the families of the executed men, the trauma was immediate and profound. For the survivors, the legacy was a mix of pride, sacrifice, and the burden of fame. Elizabeth Layton, The Broken Promise. The story of James J. Andrews' fiancée, Elizabeth Layton of Flemingsburg, Kentucky, adds a poignant and tragic human element to the civilian leader's life. Andrews and Layton were engaged when the war began. Andrews' intelligence work often led him to Flemingsburg. Upon receiving the news of his execution as a spy, Layton was utterly devastated. Local accounts suggest she never recovered from the emotional blow, dying 2 years later, often described by her family as having died from a broken heart. Her story is a quiet reminder of the personal, non-military price paid for Andrews' mission, the burden of the medal. For the wives and children of the surviving Medal of Honor recipients, the fame was a mixed blessing. While the medal conferred honor, it did not always confer wealth or stability. Many of the men struggled with war-related illnesses and injuries, limiting their post-war careers. Their families became the keepers of the stories, responsible for preserving the honor of the medal and attending the countless reunions and memorial services that define their fathers' or husbands' later years.
The second generation's fight. Decades after the war, the children and grandchildren of the executed raiders, who were only posthumously awarded the MOH,
often had to fight bureaucratic battles to ensure their ancestors were officially and justly recognized by the military records. This struggle highlights how the process of historical remembrance often continues long after the historical event itself has passed. The final act of the Andrews raid is played out not on the tracks or in London, but in the pages of historical monographs, where historians continue to argue over the raid's true place in American military history. This academic analysis provides the dense informational content for a book-level conclusion. The revisionist critique. In the mid-20th century, a wave of revisionist history challenged the popular heroism narrative. These scholars argued that focusing heavily on the raid distracts from the massive, complex movements of armies. They suggested that the entire episode, though dramatic, was ultimately a minor sideshow to the true strategic objectives of the war. They emphasized the tactical failure, not burning the Etowah Bridge, over the moral victory. The counter-revisionist defense. In response, other historians emphasized the institutional legacy. They argued that an event that led directly to the creation of the Medal of Honor, an institution that defines military culture, cannot be considered a sideshow. They pointed to the diplomatic evidence showing that the timing of the news of the executions and the subsequent MOH ceremony were perfectly leveraged to influence British policy, making the raid a decisive factor in the political landscape of the war. The railroad's perspective. A unique vein of historiography focuses solely on the railroad. These experts detail how the W&A Railroad and the quick response of Conductor Fuller and his crews became a Confederate organizational success story. This interpretation reframes the chase as a microcosm of the South's overall logistical agility, even as it was losing the broader war. The story of the Great Locomotive Chase, a dash across Georgia that lasted only a few hours, is a permanent lens through which Americans view the meaning of duty and sacrifice. It is a tale where a failed act of sabotage achieved a victory far greater than its designers ever intended. Today, the monument at Chattanooga and the two preserved locomotives, the General and the Texas, stand as tangible reminders of a day when the fate of a fledgling republic briefly rested not on the shoulders of generals, but on the courage of 22 ordinary men and the iron spine of America's industrial might. The final whistle of the General echoes not as a signal of surrender, but as a permanent, glorious sound of the nation's highest honor. A key element of any massive historical account is detailing the artifacts and physical remnants that ground the story in reality. The Great Locomotive Chase left behind a fascinating array of relics, now scattered across museums and private collections, each telling a piece of the larger story. The chains of captivity, the heavy iron shackles worn by the raiders in Swim's jail, particularly those used on Jacob Parrott, are among the most powerful and chilling artifacts. Preserved and occasionally displayed, these chains are a tangible link to the suffering that defined the initial creation of the Medal of Honor. The whistle's sound. The original whistle from the General is a prized possession, its high, sharp shriek now silenced. Audio engineers have studied historical accounts to recreate the exact sound of a 440 American Standard engine under pursuit, a sound that, to those who were there, was the very sound of war and desperate flight. The medal prototypes. The earliest versions of the Medal of Honor were slightly different in design from later models. The few surviving original 1863 medals awarded to the Raiders are priceless, representing the birth of the American tradition of honor. Their value lies not in the medal, but in their status as the first material objects created by the U.S. government specifically to recognize extraordinary personal valor. Fuller's personal watch. Conductor William A. Fuller's watch, which he consulted constantly during the frantic chase, serves as a counter-relic.
It represents the relentless pursuit of time and efficiency that drove the Confederacy's desperate efforts to maintain its railway lifeblood. The enduring popularity of the Great Locomotive Chase ensured that history would give way to dramatization. Analyzing the shift from fact to fiction reveals much about America's evolving self-image. Buster Keaton's genius, 1926. The General is widely considered one of the greatest films ever made. However, Keaton, a master of silent comedy, took vast liberties, famously inverting the historical narrative to make the Confederate conductor, Fuller, the heroic protagonist, and the Union Raiders the clumsy antagonists. This choice allowed Keaton to avoid the lingering political bitterness of the 1920s and focus purely on the visual spectacle and the universal theme of a man pursuing his beloved engine. The film's historical inaccuracy is secondary to its artistic achievement. It transformed the raid into timeless cinematic myth. Disney's post-war patriotism, 1956. Decades later, Disney's version, starring Fess Parker, was explicitly designed to be a patriotic corrective released during the Cold War era. It meticulously restored the Union perspective, emphasizing the bravery and moral fortitude of Andrews and the Medal of Honor recipients. This movie shaped the perception of an entire generation, making the raid synonymous with selfless American military heroism. The unfilmed truth. Historians often note that the most dramatic parts of the story, the London diplomatic crisis, Parrott's torture, and the complex ethical choices made by Andrews, have rarely made it fully onto the screen, proving that the visual spectacle of the chase often overrides the profound intellectual and emotional depth of the historical event. The history of the Andrews raid is a tapestry woven from the highest ideals of courage and the darkest moments of war. It is a saga that began with a train whistle and ended with a granite monument, securing its place not just in Civil War history, but in the very core of American identity. The whispers of the past continue to speak. The chains rattle softly, the bronze engine gleams, and the names of 22 men stand permanently inscribed as the foundation of American honor. A deeper understanding of the raid requires placing it firmly within the socio-economic context of the 1660s. The failure of the raid was in many ways a function of the South's intense focus on preserving its limited industrial infrastructure, the railroad economy. In the Confederacy, the Western and Atlantic Railroad was more than a supply line. It was a symbol of Southern modernization and a vital link for the cotton economy. Conductor Fuller's pursuit was not just a military action, but a fierce defense of his company's capital assets. This personal, proprietary zeal fueled a pursuit that no military order could have duplicated. Fuller's crews treated the theft of the General as a direct attack on their livelihood, making their repair work quick and brutal, the North's industrial advantage. Conversely, the Union's ability to create and quickly award the Medal of Honor speaks to its burgeoning administrative and industrial capacity. The North had the resources to quickly commission a new military decoration, manufacture the bronze medals, and use the press to disseminate the image of the award instantly across the Atlantic. This was a form of industrial victory in the realm of propaganda. The South, by contrast, could only offer the noose, an ancient form of punishment that played poorly on the international stage. The act of establishing the Medal of Honor itself is a pivotal piece of institutional history stemming from the raid. The process was not instant, but a deliberate legislative maneuver that shaped military awards for the next century. The legal precedent. The initial legislation for the Medal of Honor was intended for the Navy in July 1862. It took the political momentum generated by the Andrews raiders, specifically the outrage over the executions and Parrott's torture, to push the Army's version into law in February 1863. The raiders' ordeal demonstrated to Secretary Stanton that the Army needed a similar, non-commissioned award
to recognize valor that fell outside traditional promotion structures.
The citation detail. The language used in the initial citations for the raiders set a powerful precedent. Instead of vague praise, the citations detailed specific acts, perilous enterprise, extraordinary courage, and enduring great torture. This commitment to specific, verifiable actions became the bedrock of all future Medal of Honor criteria, emphasizing factual bravery over generalized heroism. Posthumous recognition. The fact that the executed men, like Shadrach and Wilson, were later retroactively awarded the MOH or were acknowledged in the spirit of the award underscored the institution's commitment to correcting historical injustices. This effort cemented the medal status as a perpetual honor, unbound by the chaos or confusion of the immediate battlefield. The Great Locomotive Chase, viewed through the lens of its socio-economic and institutional consequences, was not a simple military raid. It was a collision of America's past and future. The agrarian proprietary zeal of the Southern Railroad economy battling the industrial, administrative might of the Union. The enduring monument to the raiders in Chattanooga, topped by the very locomotive they stole, stands as a permanent marker to the victory achieved, not by force of arms, but by force of spirit, and the lasting power of a medal born from an act of incredible, high-speed desperation. The most lasting consequence of the Great Locomotive Chase lies in the philosophical and ethical definition it provided for American courage. Before the raid, valor was largely defined by direct combat and battlefield success. After the raid, the definition expanded dramatically. Courage as defiance. Jacob Parrott's Fortitude under Torture introduced the idea that profound courage could be entirely passive, the defiance of the spirit in the face of maximum duress. This elevated the moral component of heroism, suggesting that holding true to a mission under interrogation was as noble as charging a fixed position. Courage as initiative. James J. Andrews' actions, though civilian, showcased courage as entrepreneurial initiative. It took a bold, outside-the-box thinker to conceive of the raid. The raiders' willingness to volunteer for a mission where the penalty for failure was death by hanging, not a soldier's honorable death, demonstrated a civic courage beyond the standard military contract, the unsung heroism of failure. The raid is philosophically a testament to the idea that failure in execution does not negate heroism in intent. The raiders failed in their primary objective, burning the Etowah Bridge, yet they succeeded spectacularly in their moral and political impact. This paradox is essential to understanding the American reverence for the underdog and the audacious attempt, regardless of the immediate result. The long-term influence of the Andrews Raiders extends to how the U.S. military conducts and recognizes its special operations, precursor to special operations. The raid is now taught at military academies as an early example of deep penetration, intelligence gathering, and unconventional warfare. It highlighted the need for small, dedicated teams rather than large regiments to strike critical infrastructure. The lesson of speed, surprise, and the absolute necessity of destroying communication lines became foundational principles of future raids and commando operations. The intelligence paradox. The events solidified the inherent danger and paradox faced by intelligence operatives. To be effective, they must operate outside the clear laws of war. Andrews' execution, while morally repellent to the North, was legally sound under the 19th century laws of war regarding spies. This ethical quandary, that the most vital intelligence work often requires actors to forfeit their legal protection, was starkly illustrated and remains a critical consideration in modern military law and doctrine. The Great Locomotive Chase is not merely a piece of Civil War history. It is a foundational myth of American industrial adventure, political maneuvering, and human resilience. It is a story preserved in bronze, granite, and cinematic film. A lasting, complex narrative where an audacious failure delivered a decisive strategic victory. The final complete narrative reveals that the raiders' greatest triumph was not against the railroad track, but against the specter of international intervention and the limitations of human fear. They proved that the highest honor is earned by those who are willing to risk everything, even the honor of a soldier's burial, for a cause they believe transcends their own lives. The legacy remains permanent. The highest honor in the U.S. military is directly traceable to the scars of a young private and the unwavering courage of 22 men who rode an engine into history. The Andrews Raiders, having completed their epic journey from Marietta to the gallows and finally to the granite monument in Chattanooga, left behind a legacy defined by paradox. Their military mission was a swift, demonstrable failure, yet their moral and political victory was absolute and eternal. The final, lasting image of the Great Locomotive Chase is not the wreckage of a rail line, but the two locomotives, the General and the Texas. The General, captured and placed atop the monument, symbolizes the audacious spirit of the Union, forever pointing north, a perpetual memorial to the 22 men who demonstrated that the cause of the Republic was worth any risk. It is a testament to the power of a small band of men to impact the world stage. The Texas, preserved and displayed as the defender of the southern homeland, symbolizes the fierce, proprietary loyalty of William A. Fuller and his crews. It represents the relentless pursuit of duty that, ironically, helped elevate the raiders to martyrdom. Today, visitors to Kennesaw and Atlanta can walk right up to these titans of iron. They can run their hands along the cold steel that once shook with the heat of a desperate high-speed chase. They can see the scars of war that were quickly repaired, contrasting with the moral scar left on Jacob Parrott's back, a scar that could only be healed by the highest honor the nation could bestow. The story of the Raiders continues to instruct, reminding us that courage is complex. It resides in the thief, the prisoner, and the pursuer. Legacy is unpredictable. A few hours of sabotage determined the course of American military honor and influenced global diplomacy for decades. The Medal of Honor, born from this incredible act, remains America's most sacred trust. The Andrews Raiders did not win the battle for the Western and Atlantic Railroad, but they won a far greater victory. They wrote the definitive first chapter in the book of American valor. This section, typical of a comprehensive non-fiction work, would provide the necessary academic validation and depth for the vast narrative presented. The foundational sources for this history are the memoirs of the surviving raiders, primarily William Pittenger's Daring and Suffering, a history of the Great Railroad Adventure, 1863, which provided the essential personal details, but were often colored by patriotic zeal and religious conviction.
The counter-narrative is drawn from the official reports of conductor William A. Fuller and the extensive Confederate court-martial records found in the official records of the War of the Rebellion. These documents provide the crucial Confederate perspective on the chase and the legal justification for the executions. The geopolitical and diplomatic sections rely heavily on the dispatches of Charles Francis Adams, U.S. Minister to Great Britain, and the official records of the U.S. State Department and the British Foreign Office. These documents illustrate the direct connection between the raid's news and the cessation of serious British proposals for intervention in late 1862 and early 1863. Modern historical analysis, particularly regarding the Medal of Honor's origins and the raid's true military ineffectiveness, is drawn from 20th and 21st century works by historians such as Russell S. Bonds and Parley K. Gross, who have meticulously separated the facts of the event from the cultural myth that grew around it. This narrative has sought to reconcile all these sources, acknowledging the inherent drama of the popular story, while grounding the final account in the rigorous documentation that defines the true, complex, and profound legacy of the Andrews Raiders.